Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
Time is 7:07. Thanks for tuning in to O'Connor and Company. We've got a busy morning, of course, coming off of the successful military strike against Iran's nuclear capabilities. At 7:35, Jonathan Shanzer will join us from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. 8:05, Caroline Glick, who now works as an international affairs advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And at 8:35, RNC Chairman Michael Whatley on the utter collapse of the Democrats. That's all coming up. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
Joining us right now is Joe DiGenova. He's the legal analyst for us and a former U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. Boy, Joe, we got a lot to get to, but good morning, first of all. Good to talk with you.
And good morning to you from Budapest, Hungary.
Nice. Oh, lovely. Try the goulash.
Oh, God.
We will do that this evening. We are in the Central Market right now doing some shopping for paprika.
Nice.
There's got a lot of different paprikas there. Be specific. Joe, listen, first, I'd love for you to reflect on the fact, listen, you were a U.S. attorney under President Ronald Reagan. He came into office partly because of the Carter administration's inept handling of the Iranian hostage situation. Yeah. And really many blame Jimmy Carter for even allowing the Islamic Republic under Ayatollah Khomeini to take hold and create that terrorist state and theocracy in Iran. What do you think of the events of the weekend?
Well, I think the events were inevitable. The criticism of the president, by the way, by the Democrats is absolutely ludicrous. There was no criticism of Barack Obama when he used missiles to kill Americans overseas and invaded countries, whether it was Syria or Libya or Hillary Clinton claiming she came, she saw, he died, famously about Muammar Gaddafi.
In Libya. Yeah.
This is Yes, it is an outrageous abuse of congressional power by the Democrats to make false claims about what the law is and what's constitutional. But that's what they do. That's their game. I think this was inevitable. It had to be done. The president did not have a choice. And for anybody who thinks he did, they're not paying attention to 20 years, almost 40 years of Iranians killing Americans all over the world.
Yeah, it seems like a waste of our time to have you comment on the Democrats now calling for the impeachment of President Trump, but quickly, there's nothing impeachable about this, right?
There's nothing impeachable, but the only impeachable offense now is being committed by the Democrats for claiming that it's an impeachable offense when never saying a word about Biden and President Obama, the sainted one, killing Americans overseas with abandon.
All right, Joe, then let's move on to some other things that happened over the weekend. First of all, the landmark decision by the Supreme Court upholding Tennessee's right to have an age restriction on these horrific chemical castration gender procedures. How wide-sweeping will this decision be?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty powerful to reset the argument towards science and logic. The irrational approach to transgenderism by the transgender lobby, where you basically put every known scientific fact upside down and claim that it's right side up, was dealt a serious blow by the Supreme Court. The Chief Justice wrote what I think will be remembered as one of his finest opinions, because he waded right in to the science of it and to the illogic, and underscore illogic of the transgender position. This will be powerful because it will give weight to arguments in public. It will help force the NCAA grow up and stop allowing boys to play in women's sports. It's a great victory for the women, the few of them who have stood up for women's rights. And it's an embarrassment for the National Organization for Women and for all the famous lefties who really believed in women's rights until the women became men. Then they didn't believe in women's rights.
Yeah, and on that, Simone Biles, the gymnast who attacked Riley Gaines, she actually erased her Twitter account, I should say X account, this weekend. So I feel like,
by the way, that was all about race. That didn't have a thing to do with gender. That was about race. That was Simone Biles. This is like the way they treat Caitlin Collins, the basketball player with Reese. Race is playing a huge factor in sports now, especially with women. Not men, women. Women are white women, black women. The fight the fight that black women are putting up to make race an issue in sports is really divisive and extremely unfortunate. You'd think there never was a civil rights movement.
It's also about promotion. Simone Biles has a book coming out. She's also being funded she gets a lot of money from these groups that also fund these trans groups. So I think there's a lot of sort of interplay here between those different areas. But I agree with you. I think race also plays into this.
Well, I think this Tennessee decision, though, is very, very helpful to the public debate on this because it underscores science and facts. Science and facts. Chromosomes mean something.
Did you, by any chance, read the New York Times Magazine article that analyzed the strategy that the ACLU had? It's a fascinating article, I have to say, even for the New York Times. They wrote it reluctantly, but it really did talk about this divide within the so-called gay rights movement right now with regard to the radical position they've taken on so-called gender-affirming care and this wackadoodle attorney, Strangio, who is a woman who presents as a man. And the position that she takes here in this divide between sort of traditional, as many people refer to them, normal gays versus this radical extreme group that seems to have taken over the ACLU and all these other very well-funded groups like Human Rights Campaign.
It has. And that is the danger here. That is that big money on the left is always present. Big money on the right is never present. It's a major problem for public debates, and it is because of the power of logic and ideas and science that the right is winning, not because they have big money, but the money on the left is so powerful. And the ACLU, by the way, is no longer the American Civil Liberties Union. It is a corrupt, left-wing, communist-oriented organization. I love to hear Alan Dershowitz talk about it now, how embarrassed he is. He used to be on the board of governors. He doesn't want anything to do with it. And as you know, he's founded a counter group. So the ACLU is useless to me.
Joe, the ACLU is actually embarrassing at this point, but will anything come of this? I mean, this New York Times piece on Strangio and the fact that Strangio essentially controls the agenda of the ACLU, is anyone going to stand up and say, well, this is insanity?
No, because the left is totally committed to insanity, and they're totally committed to listen, this is anarchy. This is intellectual anarchy. Just as you have Democrats who are in favor of anarchy against ICE and anarchy against law enforcement and defunding the police, this is anarchy against logic and science. When you have anarchy against logic and science, you get a monstrous clash of civilizations, and we are in the midst of a civil war.
Hey, Joe, can you stay with us? We have a lot of decisions here over the last several days with regard to immigration, deportations, the Mahmoud Khalil, and, of course, our favorite Maryland man. I should say Chris Van Hollen's favorite Maryland man. Can you just stick for one more segment?
Of course, my paprika is waiting.
Well, we won't tell Victoria about that. Oh, that's your nickname for her. I guess she does have that red hair going. She looks like a little paprika.
That is correct.
7:15.
WMAL, making sense of the news. Live from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios. Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
We continue with Joe DiGenova. Joe, a criminal court judge has determined that our favorite Maryland man, although the New York Times is now calling him a Salvadoran man. I don't know if you're getting the New York Times there in Hungary, but yeah, quite the shift.
Yes,
but this judge
Yes.
has determined that Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia cannot be held without bail in criminal custody. But, of course, he transfers directly to an immigration ICE facility. How does this play out with this man and, again, judges determining things that don't seem to make logical sense?
Well, it's the immigration court ruled the same day that the judge did that he was deportable. So we are now going to be in a battle of the court systems, and there's going to be more litigation and probably a habeas proceeding filed on his behalf. But he should not legally, under the law, be released at this point because he has now been deemed deportable. So, it's going to be this. This is the court's going to end up in the Supreme Court again on the rocket docket.
At what point, and we saw another federal judge step up and reverse more obvious executive branch decisions that the Trump administration. What can John Roberts do here, or is he just trying to play it cool and have everything be appealed and go through the process to get up to a formal decision of the Supreme Court? Can he step in and give better guidance to these judges?
No. What they can do is he can do what he did the other day. When he writes an opinion, it needs to be forceful, clear, lay it down cold. And the first chance they get to deal with these nationwide injunctions, they have to issue a very strong ruling. If he doesn't do that, then the anarchy will continue, and that is very bad for the federal court system. I hope he's smart enough to realize that he has to sit on these federal judges, because it's very apparent now when you look at the numbers over various presidencies. These are partisan decisions by Democratic judges. They are ruining the federal judiciary. They are having the public lose confidence in the objectivity of the court system. They are doing grave damage to the constitutional structure of the country. And you can, when you listen to the way they write their opinions, the language that they use is so injudicious. It's the kind of language that a court of appeals should slap down and recognize and say something about it when these cases go up, about the language of these judges.
Joe, I just want to shift over to another case, Mahmoud Khalil. He was released on bail.
Yes.
And, despite all this commentary about him, just being this nice dad of a newborn and being separated from his family, he didn't run home to see his baby. No. He was on the streets in New York, rioting and ginning up the group of rioters outside of Columbia right away. Why can't he be deported immediately? What's the process there?
Well, the process now is that an immigration court is going to have to revisit this, and there's going to have to be a new decision about his status, and I think that will be underway. This is the problem with a court system, and let me just be fair to the court system on this one. All of this exists because Joe Biden allowed more than 20 million people to enter the country illegally, and now the system is overrun by the process that he created. This is why Biden will be remembered literally as the worst president in the history of the United States. What he did to destroy immigration control in our country is disgraceful, but we are now left to fix it up. We are now left to fix it up and do what we have to do to make it work. And it's really an offensive to the judges to be saddled with this, because they have limitations on what they could do. We have some bad judges. That's true about that. But the truth is, we wouldn't be here dealing with this because of this if it weren't for President Biden and Attorney General Garland and the Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco and, of course, Mayorkas, who I tell you, when history is written, these people will have special black marks on their names in history books.
Joe DiGenova, a busy day, but we are very grateful that you were able to carve out some time for us as you shop for paprika in Hungary and Budapest. Have you been to Budapest before? And are you pronouncing with the appropriate sh in the Pest?
We started the day in Buda and we ended up in Pest, and we are on our way. And then we are on our way to the lower Danube, and we end up in Gurgyu and then Istanbul.
Nice.
Wow. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's good to be Joe DiGenova.
Yeah, it's good to be Joe.
Yeah, we started in Vienna. And we made our way here. So we're just moving along.
Oh.
Thank you, Joe. It's 7:22.
Adios.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app. O'Connor and Company.
7:37, O'Connor and Company on a busy Monday morning, 23rd day of June. Coming up at 8:05, Caroline Glick. She's an advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. 8:35, RNC Chairman Michael Whatley. It's Larry O'Connor with Julie Gunlock. Julie, good morning.
Good morning.
Joining us now is Jonathan Shanzer, Executive Director of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Pleasure to be with you.
Is the Middle East a safer place now after the bombing strike against the Iranian nuclear facilities?
Big picture, absolutely it is. You don't have the threat of a nuclear Iran, And I think on top of that, the Israelis have done a lot to reduce those ballistic missile stores that the regime had. But the work's not over. And I think we need to just be aware the Israelis are still at it day in and day out. I mean, 24/7, they've got those F-35s up in the skies over Iran. They're still chipping away at the power of the regime. And I think we also need to understand that the regime right now, it's like a wounded animal. And they may decide to lash out at the United States. We could see attacks on American troops. We could see attacks against consulates and embassies, or even lone wolf attacks against Americans overseas. These things are possible, but I would just say that it would be suicide for the regime to go down this road. It doesn't mean they won't do it, but like I said, because they really do seem like wounded animals right now. But I would say that broadly speaking, the picture looks pretty good, that the nuclear program has been dismantled. The military is being dismantled. That is a good thing when we're talking about the world's foremost state sponsor of terrorism and a regime that was responsible for killing and maiming hundreds of American servicemen in Iraq and Afghanistan over the years. So I think overall, I'm pretty happy with what I see so far.
Jonathan, I'm just curious if you have a sense of when we will know with certainty that these facilities were destroyed or crippled to a point of, not really being able to come back online for years and years. I know that, we obviously can't go tour them, but what is the process of sort of determining the level of destruction that occurred and to just assurance that it is really over?
Yeah, I mean, look, we had that press conference yesterday morning with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and some of his generals, and they were starting to give, what we call the BDA, the battle damage assessment. I think it's still a process. I think it's not an event, as they say. And so they're still collecting intelligence. They're picking up signals intelligence from the regime. They're trying to, I think, get a sense on the ground of what's happening. But this is not easy stuff, right? It's an active war zone, and it's chaos. I did see this morning that the Israelis were bombing the roads to Fordo. So in other words, they're not letting regime assets get close to this nuclear facility that was hit. And my assumption is that there are probably Israeli special forces on the ground. Maybe there are American assets there as well, just trying to get a sense of, if things need to be hit again, where the proper place would be for an F-35, for example, one of the Israeli planes. I don't think the U.S. wants to go back. I think that if there's any cleanup here, it is almost certainly going to come from the Israelis.
Jonathan Shanzer is our guest. He's the executive director of Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Jonathan, the president, in his remarks to the nation Saturday night, had a renewed call for peace. He said, now's the time. Let's get peace in the region. Iran needs to come to the table. What does peace with Iran look like at this point? Is it possible with the current regime?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on it right there. I mean, this is a regime that regularly calls for death to America, death to Israel. They hate the West. Their entire reason for being is spreading what they call, the Islamic Revolution. They want to see more people rise up in violence and Islamist hate. And so the idea that they would, capitulate to the United States, that they would surrender to Israel, this just seems highly unlikely. I mean, I think you have to ask, are they still the Islamic Republic of Iran if they do these things? And I think the answer is no. But look, I do think that there are ways of bringing down this regime, even from within. I am sure that right now there are disaffected mid-level ranks within the regime that are saying, I don't want to die for this crazy old kook. The Ali Khamenei, right, he's brought us to the edge of disaster. And I've got to imagine that there are people right now thinking, hey, maybe I can bring him down and bring Iran to the table. We can save our own bacon, so to speak, and maybe move on from here. So I think there's that. And I think you also need to remember that, just even over the last 12 hours or so, the Israelis have been hitting some signs of power for the regime internally. They're sort of apparatus for repression. They've hit the Besiege They've hit the IRGC. They've taken out at least the entrance to Evin Prison, which is where political dissidents are held. In other words, it looks like what the Israelis are now trying to do is to message to the people of Iran that they should rise up. And that's not going to be something you see the United States do. But I do think that the Israelis have no fear whatsoever about pushing for something like that.
We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, though. Always good to talk with you. That's Jonathan Shanzer, Foundation for Defense of Democracies. It's 7:43.
WMAL's Vince Colonnese, weekdays at noon on 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
Well, following up on that last question that we just had for Jonathan Shanzer, what would the next step be for the people of Iran and potentially a new government there? Not to get ahead of ourselves, but you know that the Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, he lives in Washington, exiled with his father back in the day. Many people, it appears, are rooting for him to actually make a triumphant return 50 years later. In fact, he is currently in the middle of a live press conference, or just concluded a few moments ago. Let's take a listen. Cut 11.
Credible reports indicate that Ali Khamenei's family and the family of senior regime officials are making preparations to flee Iran. The regime is on its last legs in towns and cities across the country. The military is fractured. The people are united. The foundation of this 46-year tyranny are shaking. This is our Berlin Wall moment. But like all moments of great change, it comes fraught with danger. We stand at a crossroads. One road leads to bloodshed and chaos, the other to a peaceful and democratic transition. The difference in these two roads depends on one factor, and one factor alone: whether the current regime in Iran is allowed to survive. If the West throws the regime a lifeline, there will be more bloodshed and chaos, because this regime will not submit or surrender after it has been humiliated. It will lash out. As long as it is in power, no country and no people are safe, whether on the streets of Washington, Paris, Jerusalem, Riyadh, or Tehran.
Mr. Pahlavi is technically still the crown prince of Iran, despite the exile since 1979. And although he has lived in the United States this entire time, he would certainly be seen as a symbolic restoration of life before the radical terrorists took over. Many people, of course, will look at this and say, oh, he's just trying to regain power and, a monarchy and all that. He addressed that. Here's cut 13.
Ali Khamenei, while he directs this war from the safety of his hidden bunker, he uses our people as human shields. It is time to end the suffering. So today, I have a direct message for Ali Khamenei. Step down, and if you do, you will receive a fair trial and due process of law, which is more than you have ever given any Iranian. To other senior regime officials, those of you whose hands are soiled with the blood of the Iranian people, you too will have to face justice. But we will not repeat the mistakes in other failed transitions.
And I think Larry, he talked about it, wanting it to be a secular, democratic Iran, not going back to the days of the Shah. Where...
Well, we've all seen those vivid images of women in Iran with, 70s style suck it to me, laughing sort of outfits, going to school and having modern haircuts and everything. And then the next thing you know, they're in burqas, or if they're even allowed out on the sidewalk. Yeah,
it's truly tragic. And my husband and I were talking last night about goodness, in our lifetimes, could it be that there's people, Americans traveling to Iran again? I mean, it's exciting to think. I know we're not there yet. I'm skipping way ahead, but it is exciting to think about.
Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Indeed. All right. Well, we'll see what happens, but there's certainly a lot of activity around the idea of Mr. Pahlavi actually being the symbolic transitional figure back to those days and then to whatever could emerge. But yes, no reason to get ahead of ourselves. This regime is going to hang on for as long as it possibly can until it can't anymore. It's 7:52. Coming up, it's the 8 o'clock hour. We're going to kick things off with Caroline Glick, advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.